Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. And today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On January 12, 2023, CBS News Minnesota aired a 24-second clip of the death of gray-haired old man Donald Blome. He died on January 10, 2023 at the age of 73 from natural causes consistent with age. But who was this old man who made it into the news summary? Donald Blome is a brutal maniac and criminal who served a life sentence in prison and despite his deeds died his death. Donald Blome's death brings to an end a long-running saga of violence and depravity that began in the 1970s and saw him commit a series of heinous crimes, culminating in the brutal murder of Caitlin Porier. Despite his long history of violence, Blome managed to evade justice for years until a chance encounter led to his capture and punishment. He began his crime spree in 1975 when he kidnapped a young girl. The pervert gagged her and took advantage of her, then locked her in the trunk of his car, but the girl was not timid, and she managed to escape, and later handed over to the police criminal. Blome was tried and found guilty, but the punishment was too lenient, and in 1978, when he was free, he again committed aggravated assault. In 1983, he was arrested for criminal sexual conduct. That same year, he threatened two young girls in a remote area with a knife, tied them to a tree and stuffed socks in their mouths. He choked and revived one of them several times and repeated that he was going to do something terrible to them. The girls were rescued when a police patrol saw their improperly parked car and responded quickly to find the owner. Blome then fled into the woods and later changed his appearance by dyeing his hair. He was arrested 2 months later when one of the girls recognized him. He pleaded guilty to the crime, but the newly received punishment did not reform him. During an examination in 1992, the psychologist concluded that without close supervision and monitoring, Blome would resume antisocial behavior in the near future. Antisocial behaviors are actions that are harmful or disregard the mental state of others, which is exactly the state the psychologist predicted Donald would be in. However, Blome managed to change his name, get a job, and get married. By May 1999, he had 6 felony convictions on his record, 5 of which involved kidnapping and violence. But who is Donald Blome? And where does the cruelty and desire to dominate others come from in an ordinary man? Let's get to the bottom of it, because perhaps the answer lies in the man's rather troubled early years. Donald Alban Blome was born on February 5, 1949, in the state of Minnesota. He was an American by nationality. Blome had a troubled childhood as he was often abused by his father from his early age until his teenage years. By then, Donald Blome was already drinking heavily and exhibiting behavioral problems, and in 10th grade he went to a reform school where he often skipped classes. The trauma of a violent relationship with his father is likely what led him to develop behavioral and alcohol problems. This was especially evident as he entered puberty. But let's take a closer look at this story through the eyes of a mentally healthy person and ponder where the chain of events that led to the man's disappearance broke down. On May 26, 1999, Caitlin Porier was working the night shift alone at a convenience store at a service station. After midnight, a customer of the store called the police to report that the clerk was gone. Police officers who arrived on the scene found the store was indeed empty. They checked the surveillance video and saw a large man holding Katie by the neck lead her out of the store around 11:40 p.m. He was wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 on the back. The fragile young woman was apparently forced out of the store. Catherine Honeck, an employee of the Subway restaurant that was next to the store from which the girl disappeared, was questioned by police. She said that shortly before the Subway store closed around 10 p.m., she saw a man acting strangely. After closing, Honeck drove home, and coincidentally, she encountered the man who was leaving the store on the road. She noted that the stranger was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab with white markings on the side. The pickup truck looped around the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in the parking lot of a local cafe. Honeck also reported that Kathy's car was still in the parking lot when she left work. Based on her description and partially recovered surveillance camera footage, a rough sketch of the kidnapper was made. He had long blonde hair and appeared to be about 25 years old. A composite sketch was made from 4 witness statements and was broadcast on local television and placed in local newspapers asking for information. While clues were being gathered, hundreds of people arrived from across the state to help circle the wooded area around the station in search of the kidnapped Caitlin Porier. Police used service dogs and helicopters, but found nothing. Posters of Kathy appeared in many newspapers and on billboards throughout the region, turning her story into a high-profile missing persons case. The local sex offender facility, which was located near the store where Katie went missing, reported that all inmates were accounted for. The information provided was accurate, which completely ruled out a kidnapping by a fugitive offender. Police officers began searching for the vehicle by license plate number and came up with Donald Blome, but unfortunately, the truck in his driveway was white in color. On June 6, 1999, the official search ended without success, but many volunteers continued to look for the girl. They believed that at least someone somewhere had seen something that would make the right connection and bring the girl home. Whether the perpetrator was brave or foolish for daring to take the girl out of a store equipped with a security camera, investigators were looking for at least one more mistake he would make. The searchers emphasized the neighborhood itself. After all, if the perpetrator was in this fairly remote area at night and returned to the store twice, it was likely that he knew the area very well, which meant that someone must have seen the man before the crime. A search headquarters was set up at the Lutheran Church in Moose Lake, with staff members assisting in processing leads and volunteers handing out flyers describing Katie. On the wall were maps with large crosses marking the areas that searchers had already traversed. But despite the efforts and hopes of many, Katie never turned up, suggesting that the kidnapper might be an athlete or a fan of the New York Yankees team. The police sought the help of a sports figure. 2 weeks passed, but still no result. The police asked Minnesota Twins legend Paul Molitor to make a public service announcement. His appeal to Minnesotans across the state caught the attention of Darrell Brown, who worked at the Minnesota Veterans Home. On June 18th, he called the hotline to report his co-worker Donald Hutchinson, who had recently stopped driving his black pickup truck and was described as looking like a composite sketch. He had been absent the day after the abduction and had recently gotten a haircut. Investigation revealed that Donald Hutchinson was actually Donald Blome and had a black pickup truck carefully hidden in his garage. He also owned property 12 miles from the store in Moose Lake where Kathy worked. During further digging, investigators learned that Blome had been convicted of sex crimes, specifically kidnapping petite young girls like Katie. Detectives worked quickly to get a search warrant. Agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension went looking for Blome and found him and his family at a campground 140 miles outside of Richfield. Agents woke him up early in the morning to ask him some questions. He was brought in for questioning. Further inspection revealed that Blome had purchased property in Moose Lake about 2 years ago. Neighbors confirmed that he had been there frequently before Katie's abduction, but had not been there since. Blome's supervisor at the veterans' home said he was unaware of the man's criminal record because he used the name Hutchinson. He said Blome always kept to himself and didn't socialize much with people. After his arrest, Donald Blome was friendly and cooperative, but then he refused to testify and asked for an attorney. Meanwhile, authorities organized a series of searches that left them in shock. Various items were seized from Blome's home, but no official statement was given as to what the items were or how they figured in the investigation. Another search was conducted on Blome's 20-acre property in Moose Lake, involving more than 100 National Guard members and several hundred volunteers. They marched several miles from his property into the woods, but as darkness fell, they had to leave. The next morning, the search resumed with renewed vigor, and Katie's mother said she had a gut feeling that they would find her daughter alive. Apparently, some hoped the girl was being held somewhere against her will, but the sheriff was less optimistic. On the morning of the second day, searchers found bone-like fragments among the ashes in a fire pit on Donald Blom's property. They were sent to the lab for further testing, and to everyone's shock, they were identified as bone fragments, and a tooth found in the ashes was also sent to odontologists, experts in dental remains. Certified forensic dentist Dr. Ann Norlander conducted a time-consuming and expensive examination of the tooth. She knew that under the conditions under which it was extracted, any DNA that could have been extracted from the pulp of the tooth would have been destroyed, so she had to resort to other methods. When she came across something that looked like a filling, it confirmed that it was a human tooth and allowed her to determine if it could have belonged to Katie. Dental fillings are made up of an organic matrix and an inorganic filler. The organic matrix burns away, leaving behind particles of the filler. This allows the analyst to identify a brand, or at least a group of brands. Manufacturers use as many as 50 different types of fillers, any one of which will show up vividly on dental x-rays. The composition of the filling of the tooth from Blom's fire pit matched the composition of the fillings used for Katie. In addition, researchers were able to identify it as tooth 18 and determine that it belonged to a young woman. The likelihood that it had once been in Kathy's mouth and not someone else from the area was quite high. One major question remains unanswered. Why did the perpetrator get out of prison after kidnapping 7 different girls? If the justice system had worked better, Katie might still be alive. Instead, Blom was able to change his name and shake off the stain of his criminal past, get a job, get married, and become a new identity as a cover to continue causing harm. In the case of Caitlin Porier, Blom was charged with kidnapping and unlawful possession of a firearm, which is a federal charge. Given his prior convictions, Blom was not allowed to carry a firearm. He was offered a plea agreement, but he didn't want to even talk. But then he changed his mind and said he was willing to testify, with the condition that he call home. On September 8th, Blom made a tearful confession that lasted 2.5 hours. He said that on that day, May 26, 1999, he went fishing and then drove home to Richfield. Later that evening, however, he returned to his home on Moose Lake. On the way, he stopped to buy liquor and have a beer at a bar. He saw Kathy in the store while she was doing business. He did not know her, but grabbed her and forcibly put her in his pickup truck. He then drove her to his motorhome. I don't know if it was just out of guilt or something else or because I felt stupid, he said, but then I strangled her and killed her. He strangled her from behind, saying it took about 20 minutes. He did not admit to any other type of assault. Once he knew she was dead, Blom placed her body in a fire pit in the fetal position and then gathered wood and paper to make it burn. But Blom's account clearly contradicted the video camera footage and the discovery in the burn pit. Blom claimed that he remembered her asking him several times to let her go, although she did not struggle with him until he began choking her on his property. He said he managed to kill her with his bare hands. His account of burning the remains was also not realistic enough, as wood and paper alone could not have reached a high enough temperature to turn a human body to ashes. When prodded, he admitted that none of this made much sense to him. He just didn't know why he did it. When the interview was over, Blom called 2 local television stations to report what he had done and asked that the reporters leave his family alone. The deal also returned confiscated property to his wife, Amy Blom, including a parcel of land on Moose Lake, a home in Richfield and the family car. For the Porier family, the confession was devastating because they had hoped Kathy was still alive. Blom now claimed that she had been murdered and cremated for no reason other than his nocturnal impulse, which he could not explain. Blom soon recanted, saying he made a false confession due to the stress of solitary confinement and the medication he was taking. He said he was hallucinating and believed the only way to escape from the cell was to tell the authorities what they wanted to hear. But he was out of his mind, he now claimed, and didn't know what he was saying. The plea bargain had been canceled, and lawyers for both sides were preparing for trial. There are different types of false confessions, and sometimes people just spontaneously confess to something they did not do. This usually happens in response to a high-profile case. Some people expect the interrogation to be too intense, so they quickly succumb to the pressure to confess. But there is another type of phenomenon that can occur. People may internalize assertions of guilt from the police and come to believe that they have committed a crime that they were not involved in. Whether Blom actually confessed to perjury or recanted his testimony is now for the jury to decide. Blom was brought to trial. The trial began in June 2000 and took 5 weeks for jury selection. The trial took another 5 weeks, during which more than 50 witnesses, including several key witnesses, were called to testify. The case was opened by Carleton County Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Thomas Pertler. Among the first witnesses, Blom's brother testified that he had given the family a box of old clothes, including a New York Yankees jersey. Blom had previously said he had never owned such a shirt. Even more damaging was the testimony of 2 women whom Blom kidnapped in 1983, who agreed to testify about how he treated them. The jury learned firsthand what he was capable of. Both women, being young girls at the time, looked like Kathy. Forensic odontologists then confirmed that the partial tooth matched Kathy's age, gender, and dental records. Dr. Ann Norlander admitted that at first she was not sure it was even a tooth. At the hearing, she testified that with a reasonable degree of medical certainty, the tooth belonged to Kathy. It was the discovery of chemicals in the filling material that led her to that conclusion. A surveillance video from another store that captured Blom back in May showed that around the time of the kidnapping, his hair, now gray, had blonde tips, as his barber confirmed, making him look younger. Most revealing was Blom's confession, which the judge allowed into evidence. Each juror was given a transcript for further review. Thereafter, there was silence in the courtroom, save for the quiet sobs of Kathy's relatives. The case against Blom seemed pretty strong at that point. Rodney Broden, lead defense attorney, called his first witness on August 7th. Amy Blom testified that her husband was home the night Katie disappeared. Speaking from the bench, she said she guessed where her husband was that day because she saw a broadcast the next day about the girl's disappearance. She called attention to it because the location of her disappearance was near the country house they owned on Moose Lake, 110 miles from their home. Because Blom had a criminal record, she figured he would be a suspect, so she later realized exactly where he had been the night before. Blom returned home at 9:30 p.m., and they had already gone to bed. When his spouse woke up in the morning, coffee was ready, his spouse was home. She also testified that the police officers bullied her, threatening to take her children away if she didn't answer questions the way they wanted her to. "They called me a liar," she said. She also denied that she had ever seen a baseball jersey in the clothes her son-in-law gave them, and said she had never seen her husband wear one. As she spoke, Blom wept, visibly wiping his eyes. On August 10th, Blom took the stand in his own defense. Under oath, he denied that he had kidnapped Kathy Porier. He remained on the witness stand for more than 3 hours, alternately talking and crying. He claimed that his life was falling apart, and he felt ill at the time. He admitted to the investigation that he had committed the crime. He added that his wife was threatening to leave his life due to media pressure, so he decided to do everything he could to free himself from the cell he was imprisoned in. He spent quite a bit of time trying to get the jury to feel sorry for him, as if he was the victim. He agreed that he had made a confession, but said he had also recanted it. He now claimed that he was not at Moose Lake the night of the crime, but rather he was sleeping at home with his wife, as she had told him. Although he had been fishing there earlier in the evening, he was home at 10 p.m. well before Katie was taken from the store. Later on cross-examination, Blom was forced to admit the lies and inconsistencies in his statements to the police at the beginning of the investigation, so appearing in court did him no good. To many, he appeared to be a whiner trying to get away with it once again. When the questioning ended, Blom looked frustrated. He turned to the judge, cursed, and asked if he could only make one statement. After a negative answer, the case went to the jury. After 10 hours of deliberation, 3 of which were spent replaying the taped confessions, the jury found Donald Blom guilty. He received a life sentence without parole. Blom continued to insist that it wasn't over and predicted that one day he would be exonerated. "I never killed anyone," he insisted. He was sure he had a strong case for appeal. But in 2004, the appeals court issued an 81-page ruling that upheld the conviction. Although his trial was not perfect, the judges decided it had been fair. They saw no reason to overturn the ruling or order a new trial. The murder of Caitlin Porier led to the passage of Katie's Law, which included the development of a statewide computerized crime-fighting network, tightening the requirements for tracking predatory sex offenders like Blom. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you.